While Joe Biden is touting his bipartisan agreement on an infrastructure bill, which of course is a watered down version of what this infrastructure bill could have been, the fact of the matter is it has devolved into nothing more than a scheme to privatize huge portions of our public infrastructure. Now, why do I say that? Well, if you look at the possible pay-fors for the $579 billion in new infrastructure spending, there is a proposal to ensure that at least $100 billion of that new spending comes from private capital. Now, why would private capital want to invest in infrastructure? Well, it's part of this public-private partnership. It's also known as P3. It's also known as asset recycling, where these private companies essentially give the federal government a massive loan, and throughout about 30 years, as the government is paying that money back, the private corporation gets to manage the infrastructure that they essentially privatized. So if it's a road or a highway, they get to implement a poll tax or a road tax, whatever you want to call it, right? All sorts of fees, and it ends up being regressive taxation, except the money doesn't go to the federal government, the money goes to the private corporation that is, of course, implementing those fees to make a profit. Private capital doesn't invest in anything unless they see a potential return on their investment. So I want to give you the details on this. Bloomberg reported on it, and they refer to it as asset recycling. Asset recycling, which is said to have been first introduced in Australia, allows the government to sell and lease infrastructure, public infrastructure, such as roads, airports, and utilities to private companies, and use the profits to develop infrastructure without incurring new debt. Now, the federal government is not, it's not getting profits, right? It gets a loan from private companies, and then it's supposed to take that money and invest it in other infrastructure projects. Now, as that Bloomberg excerpt noted, this was something that was first introduced in Australia, and guess what? 2 years after they introduced it, they actually repealed the law because it ended up being such a complete disaster. All of this public infrastructure was being sold off to private companies, and then the government wasn't actually investing that money that it received from private capital into new infrastructure projects. So they scrapped it about 2 years after they passed it. Now, at the time, an Australian Senate committee said it was, quote, concerned about the possibility that incentives under the asset recycling initiative may encourage privatization without effective public consultation and communication strategies, and without appropriate consideration or analysis of future costs. And the costs were pretty brutal for people who needed to use these roads and highways, and all of a sudden were slapped with these tolls. Now, with that said, we have done some privatization of public infrastructure in this country already, and I want to show you how it's worked out for people.
Virginia is a big believer in public-private partnerships and points to successes like the express lanes here along the Beltway, where a driver can choose to pay a toll to get around congestion. They say it's been a big success, but those successes have come with some costly mistakes. Every time you get into your car, it's like ka-ching. Ka-ching.
Totally.
Linda Dyer's daily commute is taking a toll. Whenever she leaves home, she's paying to use tunnels that used to be free. Now she's thinking about moving elsewhere.
We're spending $1,200 a year in tolls.
Yeah, and my biggest concern is it going to affect how easy it is for me to sell my house.
Virginia agreed to a 58-year deal with a private company to modernize and expand the tunnels linking Portsmouth and Norfolk, two military towns separated by the Elizabeth River. The tolls to cross can run a driver $5.25 each way.
Do you just get mad when you're driving through that tunnel?
Yes, I do.
I have so many other examples to share with you all, but this is a complete and utter disaster, Cenk, because Biden said, no, I am not gonna implement a gas tax. I'm not gonna implement any type of financial burden for working people. When the fact of the matter is, this bipartisan bill does just that.
Yeah, no, I would vote no on the bill at all, period, because of this. So there's two components that struck me. One is the money that they let us borrow, right? And so first of all, they charge a 10% margin, and they want accompanying tax breaks. This was cooked up by Peter Navarro and Wilbur Ross, two of the worst people in the Trump administration. They cooked this up before Trump even won. They wrote a report about it. It was meant as a gift to Wall Street because that's free money. The government can just print money. We do it all the time, right? And by the way, that's the normal course of things. I'm not saying, oh wow, go print money to give in some sort of bailout. No, we can raise money and not pay a 10% margin. Why are we giving away a 10% margin for no reason and tax breaks and all these other things? That's just literally highway robbery, right? And anyone who agrees to that is just saying, take taxpayer money in billions of dollars and just give it to Wall Street for no reason at all. So now and that's why the right-wing donors in that tape that was leaked said our best shot here is an under the dome strategy because their proposals are so deeply unpopular with both Democratic and Republican voters that they have to get their corrupt henchmen in under the dome of the Capitol to commit this robbery for them, okay? So now the second part is the asset recycling that Anna referred to. They can barely contain their disdain at us, right? I mean, even asset recycling sounds like it's something terrible, and they're like, "Who cares? Just say it." No. We own Congress anyway.
Okay, fun trivia in regard to that. So public-private partnership does not poll well. It's actually pretty unpopular.
Of course, because it's awful.
So they initially changed it to P3, and I'm not just talking about America. This has been done in other countries like Australia, and that's why they have to keep like rebranding it because it's been such a failure. So then they're like, okay, public-private partnership, they don't like it. Let's just call it P3. That way they don't know what the P's stand for. And then people aren't stupid. They're not stupid, they know. And so then they changed it to asset recycling as if asset recycling sounds any better, right? I don't think the human capital likes asset recycling either.
Human capital, they are the worst. Okay, so now 3 horrific parts of asset recycling. So number 1, when they privatize public things, it turns into a disaster. You got the numbers on Chicago? Because I can give it.
Go ahead.
Okay, so in Chicago, they privatized the paid meters. Oh, epic debacle. So now some of the meters are charging 800% more than they used to. That's 8 times more than you used to pay. Why? Because we gave it to a private company, and they're like, what do we care how much pain it causes? Especially poor and middle class people, which is a much bigger percentage of their income. So what? Charge them 8 times more, we make more money. The government gave us a monopoly. There's literally nothing they could do about it. They got, this is of course idiot Rahm Emanuel, actually corrupt Rahm Emanuel who did this deal. They got a little over $1 billion immediately in cash to fill a budget hole so that Rahm could say, oh, I'm so good at balancing a budget, right? You know how much it costs? A little over $1 billion they got. Now granted it's over 75 years, but in return they're gonna get at least $11 billion. Would you do a deal like that? Okay, you get $1 now, and then you have to pay me $11 afterwards. Why would I do that deal? That doesn't make any sense, right? Unless you're working for the guy who just robbed the taxpayers, okay? But it gets worse.
It does.
Okay, and there's other examples of this, but in Chicago, they can't build bike lanes because the private companies own the meters and they go, you can't mess with our meters, so we're going to ban you from doing something that will help your city. And they're like, we have a contract. We have a contract.
Yep.
Did you know, and it's also true in this bill, that sometimes they say if we build a road and we're charging you tolls like you just saw in Virginia, you're not allowed to improve any other roads nearby because it would compete with our monopoly.
Yep. No, it gets
That's
even worse.
insane. That's insane. And I haven't even gotten to the other 2 bad parts.
Right. Oh, well, okay. So I have to mention one of the other downsides of this, and there are many. The other downside is, okay, take a step back and think about what the whole point of this infrastructure bill is allegedly supposed to be. We have crumbling infrastructure, we need to improve it. It's been decades and decades since we've invested the necessary money into this. Okay, great, but what would a private company want to do if they're investing their capital into our public infrastructure? They want a return on that investment. How do you get a return on your investment, Cenk? I don't know, I'm not like some economist, I'm not an expert, but I think it's that they'd like to cut the costs, maximize profits. Yes. And so you think a private company is gonna do the necessary repairs to our infrastructure? No, this is just another corporate handout. It's another redistribution of wealth from the bottom to the top, as if these guys haven't had enough money and haven't ripped off the American people enough. They're not even gonna do what the whole point of this infrastructure bill is meant to do, which is improve our infrastructure. They're just looking at this as an opportunity to make more money for themselves. That's it.
There's 2 brilliant points in there. Number one, not only do they forbid you from improving roads nearby, but they don't have to improve their road at all after they build it. And all it would do is add to their costs. So why would they do that? In fact, we saw it already happen in Texas. They have the pipelines, it's a monopoly. They said, why would I improve it? Weatherize it so it can survive a winter storm? Or the very beginning of summer? No, I'm not gonna do that. That adds costs. You suckers have to pay me no matter what. In fact, in the middle of the emergency, I'm gonna charge you 10 times more. So we already saw what a debacle it is in Texas. Now Biden and Manchin and Sinema want to help the Republicans bring that debacle to the rest of us, okay? So to Anna's point there, guys, do you think Wall Street's fighting tooth and nail for this because they're gonna lose money on it? No, they're fighting tooth and nail for this, and why it has the Republican version of this bill, what they're calling bipartisan version of the bill, has a very good chance of passing because they're gonna make tons and tons of money off of it, off the American taxpayer. Okay, now last point of why this is disastrous is the most important, if you ask me. And now all of these were horrible, right? But guys, they basically, the original idea for the infrastructure bill, the so-called Democratic idea was, we're gonna raise corporate taxes to pay for most of it, right? So corporations were gonna pay for better infrastructure, which they then use. They use it in trucking and shipping and all the different things that they use, get to use for free because of the taxpayers paying for those roads and bridges, right? Okay, they have now replaced that with, no, corporations aren't gonna pay anything, not a dollar, okay? Instead, we're gonna charge you tolls and fees for the rest of your life. What did they just do? They just moved the tax burden from the largest corporations in the world, a lot of them are paying no taxes anyway, right? Onto you who can least afford it, onto the poor, middle class, et cetera, in America. And that is a giant percentage of your income.
Yep.
Whereas it would be a minimal percentage of the corporate income, right?
It's even worse though, because it's not even a tax where the money that you're paying goes to the federal government. The money that you pay in those tolls goes in the pockets of corporate executives who then buy shares of their own stock to inflate the value of that. Like it has no benefit to you as an American citizen, as a taxpayer, as an individual who's forced to pay these tolls. It is a lose-lose all the way around for the American people. It's a lose-lose in regard to actually improving our infrastructure. It's a lose-lose when it comes to the amount of money you're gonna have to spend. And it's a lose-lose when it comes to resources for the federal government, because as Cenk mentioned, the federal government pays that money back to the private companies with interest, So that's what the reality of the situation is. And I don't think that progressives should vote in favor of this bipartisan bill under any circumstance. Because what this is, it's reminiscent of what Obama passed after the 2008 economic collapse. What he did was essentially provide a massive giveaway to hedge funds and private equity firms who then went off. I mean, there was a fire sale. They went off and they got the best deals on a massive amount of real estate, which they then turned to rental property and priced ordinary Americans completely out of the housing market. It all started under Obama. Now with Biden and this infrastructure bill, you have corporate interests with their eyes set on really draining what they can out of the few resources we have left in our public infrastructure.
Yeah, so last couple points here that are so important. Number one, did you know that Trump had the same exact proposal?
Yeah, he did, yeah.
And so when Trump proposed it, Democrats in the media were like, oh, this is outrageous. Biden proposed the same exact thing. They're like, bravo, bipartisan compromise. Biden is such a great leader. It's amazing, it's sickening. By the way, have you heard any of these facts in mainstream media? Have you heard them talking about asset recycling? Did they tell you that you're gonna pay tolls and fees the rest of your life? That that's what we're celebrating with this bipartisan compromise? How funny, they didn't tell you any of that, right? And it's interesting, I wonder who the corporate media is working for. Now we work for you guys, so I'm gonna read a member comment because I hadn't thought of this point. And it's further devastating. Kit tested, Politburo approved. That's their handle on our website, tyt.com/join. You literally join the show. We read your comments on these stories. this person wrote in, my favorite part of driving is having a corporation intentionally create traffic congestion and then give me the option to pay them to avoid the mess they made. And honestly, I had not thought of it that way. It's not just that you're paying tolls. It's not just that they're not going to upgrade the roads. They have an incentive to create a terrible road that forces you to take the toll version, which then charges you so much more. The worse they make the road, the more money they make. Are we insane? This is what our government is giving to us and we're supposed to celebrate it and the media cheers on? Look, they've done this in other countries. It's not just Australia where they privatized the roads and bridges and turned around, as Anna told you. Anna made a great point in our production meeting. This is exactly what they did in Russia, where the oligarchs they privatized everything. The oligarchs grabbed everything. Yep. They made all the money and made gazillions of dollars, and the Russian people got totally screwed. Yep. They did it in Bolivia, where they privatized the water. It nearly led to a revolution. The only good side of that is that they've been electing progressives almost ever since, right? With the exception of our coups from time to time, okay? But they told the Bolivians, you cannot collect rainwater because we gave the water to a private company. And so this is where we're headed, guys. They're selling off the country bit by bit while pretending to build it. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.